Let's start. I see the doors being closed. So welcome here for a presentation about implementation guide tooling that's out there and you can use. So I'm doing this talk together with Lloyd, and I think we can introduce ourselves. So maybe Lloyd, you can.
My name is Lloyd McKenzie. I've been doing FHIR since before it was FHIR, and doing HL7 for a heck of a lot longer than that. My involvement in IGs is I put together probably over 10 of them now, and am heavily involved in maintaining some of the tooling that's used by HL7 to publish our own IGs.
Yeah, great. So I'm Ardon Toonstra. I work at FHIR, where I'm mostly a FHIR profiler, and I'm also helping in creating FHIR specifications for the MedMai project in the Netherlands, where we also need to create an implementation guide. So what are we going to cover in this presentation? Well, we first very briefly talk about the concept of an implementation guide and what goes in and what is the output of it, because hopefully by now you will know a bit about implementation guides. Then I will start by showing the implementation guide editor of Simplifier and provide a very short demo. And Lloyd will follow with the Trifolia tool and with the HL7 publisher tool. Well, our main objective is just to show you what's out there and not to go into too much depth because we don't have time for that. So we will just briefly cover some of the tools, and if you have questions, please come afterwards. And I also prepared some extra documentations which you can find on the FHIR DevDays exercises, and provided some content which you can use to create your own implementation guide or to try it out. So when we're talking about implementation guides, I'm talking about the human readable form which you present to your author. So in the implementation guide you will put all your FHIR specifications, which can be your profiles or your structure or your capability statements, like all your FHIR conformance resources needed for your use case, and you describe to the author or the implementer how they should use it, which can be done in HTML pages or markdown pages. And there's tooling around there that will, or the tooling that we're going to discuss, will help in creating a web-based or an implementation guide, which puts it all together and provides a human readable form. It will also pack all of those conformance resources together as necessary. So to create all those conformance resources, there are that goes into your implementation guide. There are a lot of tools out there. And here is a whole list for every structure definition. For implementation guide resource itself, so not the web-based version or the output, but actually the FHIR resource. You can use Forge or Trifolia. And well, you see that these all have links to the tools. The presentation will become available so you can actually follow those links to the right tool. Well, for capability statements, we have the FHIR toolkit and Trifolia. The structure definitions, also known as profiles. We've got Forge, Trifolia, CleanFHIR, and I think nobody is using Excels at the moment anymore. But for value sets, again the same. But you still use Excel?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, really? Oh, interesting. Well, for value sets, another one that comes up is Snapper, which is also a very good, nice tool. For concept maps, yeah, it's also for Snapper. And then we got the structure map, we got the open mapping source, I'm not sure what the exact name is. And for example instances, well, we have CleanFHIR or just an XML or Notepad++ tool. Or you can use SmartThread to help you guide in creating examples. And for example scenarios and questionnaires, we have the FHIR toolkit. So again, these links are made available through the presentation, so you can visit them yourselves. Then we do have some FHIR resources where no tooling is available yet, which are the creation operation definitions or message definitions, graph definition, and naming systems. And for these, you can just use the old-fashioned XML tool or JSON tool, whatever you provide. And that's also the case for the Markdown or HTML files. So I will now start with Simplifier, which is our collaboration platform and also like a very specialized FHIR repository where everyone can store his FHIR specifications. And it also has a web-based implementation guide editor, which you can use to actually pack all of your specifications together and provide human-readable text with it. And well, we made it free for everyone, so everyone can have one free project on Simplifier, and you are also allowed to, you can also use the implementation guide editor for free. It's possible to use your own project resources, but you can also use all the other resources that are publicly available on Simplifier. And you just enter them in your implementation guide with some of our statements we have. So for example, if you use render and then the project name, or the project URL key and the resource URL key, you can, the implementation guide will render that specific FHIR resource in your implementation guide. Well, we got so far 3 different formats and designs, which you can switch between. I will show them later on. For the more advanced plans, we also have your own custom CSS, which you can add to your implementation guide to give it a better look and feel. Further, all the pages have history and logging. You can work with multiple project members on your implementation guide. It's also possible to have your implementation guide in GitHub and with a GitHub link, or GitHub webhook to Simplifier, which will then render all the resources which are in your GitHub project. It's also possible to export the whole implementation guide to HTML static files or to the implementation guide resource. And currently we are working on aligning it more with the HL7 publisher, where we have a first demo where we use the export of Simplifier to put it into the HL7 publisher. And Lloyd, it's still work in progress, and Lloyd will talk more about the HL7 publisher later on. So let's have a look at the IG editor itself, which looks like this. It's a 3-column editor. So on the left side you have the structure of your IG, which works with the tree. So you can enter well, your framework of your implementation guide. So every node on the left side is a page. So for example, here I am at the real life example page. And in the middle you've got your Markdown based editor. Well, what you can see, for example, on the left side you see such a statement like tree, and you see on the right side, which is a preview of your work in the middle, you can see that the resource as it is rendered on Simplifier is shown. Well, if you then press, for example, on the preview button, or you look at the implementation guide that's online, this is the result what you will see. So we chosen here for a menu implementation guide. With on the left side you will have, on the top side you will have menus, which are the first nodes on the tree, which you had in the previous screen on the left side. And then the lowering depth of nodes will be the hover bar on the left side. So if you click on it, you will get to the right part of it. So I would like to quickly demonstrate 2 implementation guides. I just picked one from Simplifier, and I would like to show the Profiling Academy, which is also built with our own implementation guide editor. And then I will show in 1 or 2 minutes how to create an implementation guide and just put in a simple statement. So just have a look at this Continua personal health device data, which you can find on Simplifier, which is again has the same menu. For example, if you click on a simple observation profile. No, sorry, thanks. I thought I duplicated my screens. 1 sec. Is this visible? Okay, so I opened up the Continua implementation guide, where they describe some of their technical stuff they need to do, and they also have a list of their profiles needed for their use case. And for example, they've got this observation profile where they provide extra guidance on how to use it. And here you've got the rendering of how Simplifier also shows it. Then for our Profiling Academy, which can be found through the main website in the box Learn, you will see that we have used the CSS to make it look a little bit more pretty. Well, for example, all the modules also contain a couple of the features the implementation guide editor has. So this is what is possible with an implementation guide. So for you, everyone can just try it out themselves. So if you go to Simplifier and you log in, you create a project, which I already did, and called it DevDays IG tutorial. I posted some, or I uploaded a couple of profiles inside it, but it's not necessarily needed because you can use every profile or every FHIR resource on Simplifier. Then you can go to the Guides tab, and you just hit the Create button, where you need to give your implementation guide a title. So, I don't know, just go with IG tutorial. And then you create it. By clicking on the Edit button, you will enter the implementation guide editor. And then this is the 3-column things I just showed you. So on the left side, you can add new pages, page 1, for example, or page 2. And this works with a drop-down hover thing, so you can put it, for example, beneath home, or if I put it in home, it's below there. And to show you how it works with the rendering of a resource, you open up and you see an IntelliSense thing that will guide you. Now, for example, I want to render a profile. I will type in render. Then here I will need to select a project. So let's look at my own. Well, I see the DevDays tutorial. And now I need to select a profile. So for example, this specimen 2 profile, and then I'll need to close the thing, and then hit Ctrl Enter to see how it renders. And here on the right side, we see that it took my specimen profile and put it already. And if I press on preview, I see how it's looking online. And we've got here actually a help section, which is also an implementation guide in an implementation guide, which will guide you through all the different functionalities of the implementation guide. For example, you can render the XML or the dictionary and so forth. So I would definitely encourage you to try it out yourself. I think so far this demo. And like I said before, I created some documentation on all the, this is the wrong display setting. Well, it doesn't really matter because this is my last slide. Because so far the Simplifier demo, I would like to give the presentation to Lloyd, who will continue with Trifolia and the HL7 publisher.
So normally this portion of the presentation would be delivered by a third person, but he's busily experiencing healthcare as opposed to teaching about healthcare today. So I'm speaking in Rick Geimer's place. Trifolia, many of you may have seen, if you're familiar with clinical document architecture, an older HL7 standard. The tool was initially developed to define profiles and templates using that, but they extended it to support FHIR profiling and have recently done a complete revamp on the tool to tune it better for FHIR profiling. It's an online tool, so you do all of your development online. If you happen to be like me and are frequently in airplanes that don't necessarily have internet connectivity, it is possible to get a local copy that sort of runs in a local environment, but you need to make arrangements with them to do that. Trifolia acts as similar to Simplifier in that it provides both a registry function as well as an editing and authoring function and a publication function. And it's also publicly available, so if you wanted to create a customized version of Trifolia, you could certainly do that. It's open source. Trifolia supports multiple FHIR versions, so they support STU2, they support STU3, they also support the current version of release 4. They're generally a week or so behind, so if there's something brand new that a workgroup just added and you need it right away, you can ping Lantana and they will grab the current set of files and upload them so that you can use the current version. It produces a standard implementation guide package that works with the IG publisher tooling. So unlike FHIR, which has its own publication stack that generates the rendered view of the publication, Trifolia is capable of using HL7's IG publisher, which we're going to take a look at in just a minute. But it also provides an ability to generate Word documents and a few other views of your published content if you prefer that. It does work, is tuned to talk to VSAC, which is really relevant to folks in the US. It's not terribly relevant to any of you. VSAC is a US government repository of value sets and code systems. But if you happen to have a jurisdictional repository of value sets and code systems that you would like Trifolia to connect to as well, they'd certainly be happy to do that. Nobody has asked them. There are endpoints within Trifolia so that you can actually query it to get the different artifacts. So you can query for implementation guides, you can query for profiles, and hit it just like you would any other RESTful server. Each version within Trifolia is maintained separately. They don't tend to play that nicely together. We recently made some changes in FHIR methodology that allow you to create a single implementation guide that supports multiple versions. So the IG publisher will shortly be changing to support that. Trifolia does not yet support that, but they've expressed an intention to do so. I presume that FHIR is going to be doing the same thing. It's not a small amount of work to support multiple versions simultaneously, given that they don't play that nicely together, but there's an increasing number of IG publishers that need to say, here's how you do it with STU2, here's how you do it with STU3, here's how you do it with R4, because we're moving into a world where different implementers support different versions, and you need to be able to give them all guidance in terms of how to talk to your product. Trifolia does have an extensive set of help documentation that will walk you through the process for creating an implementation guide, adding profiles to it. It also supports authoring value sets and then exporting that content. And that's kind of hard to read, but you can actually go through and identify expectations for what rules are shell rules, so hard rules that your instances will fail if you don't validate against them, but you also have the ability to identify may and should rules where this is a good practice and might raise a warning if you don't satisfy it, but it's not necessarily going to cause things to fail. In terms of value sets, the value sets that they support right now are enumerated value sets, so you actually identify what specific set of codes you want, or you point to an external definition. Trifolia does not yet support doing full terminology services functions where you can say, I want all SNOMED codes that are procedure codes that have a body site of lung, and have the tool figure out what those are. That's something that's on their wish list, but it's not something that's quite available, but they do let you point to external terminology services that can do that sort of thing for you. In terms of export, so you can produce a IG publisher package that can then run through HL7's IG publisher, and right now, if you're wanting to ballot content through HL7 International, that's the only format that we take. We've had some problems with accepting other formats in terms of consistency of rendering and making sure that everything that implementers need to review the content was there. but Trifolia does also support their own HTML rendering. They spit everything out just as a FHIR bundle. Here's your implementation guide, here's everything else. Makes it easy to pass around to other tools. And as mentioned, they do support MS Word. Not that you should publish implementation guides using MS Word. It's not that developer friendly. So there's the endpoints if you're wanting to query and poke around to see what kind of stuff is in Trifolia right now. And it supports the same FHIR operations that any RESTful server would support. There are some capabilities that it does not yet support. So if you're getting really adventurous and you're creating a profile on top of another profile, and top level profile has slicing and your profile has slicing, Trifolia doesn't deal with that yet. It doesn't support mappings to local specifications, although I think that's on their list as well. They do hope to integrate with SimpliFIR so that you could publish content from Trifolia directly into SimpliFIR, but we've been changing the way implementation guides work every 3 months, something like that, which makes it really difficult for everybody who's trying to develop implementation guide tooling to play nicely with each other. But we do have a vision of playing nicely with each other one of these days. And implementation guides are, as we get more experience with them, they are becoming more stable, and thus the tooling is becoming more stable as well. So that's where you can go find it if you want to poke around with it, and would certainly encourage you to do that. Last tool is the HL7 IG Publisher. This one's been around for the longest, which is 3.5 years, I think, which isn't terribly long. We created this when we started to have enough solidity to the FHIR specification that creating implementation guides made sense. It leverages a lot of the same underlying code as the HL7 publication itself. So when we publish FHIR on the FHIR website, we have a bunch of different rendered views, and a lot of that same code is leveraged by the IG Publisher, and you can actually generate implementation guides that look a fair bit like the HL7 specification and link into that HL7 specification. The IG Publisher is open source. You're free to take the code and run with it and do things with it. You're also free to come and help us. We'd welcome that. If you're finding a bug or you have a new feature that you'd like to see, we're more than happy to have that contributed back in. The way the IG Publisher works is you start with an implementation guide instance that points to a bunch of profiles or value sets or capability statements or example instances or other things. It then generates rendered fragments for those. So if you have a profile, it'll generate a nice little hierarchical view of the snapshot and of the differential, and it'll generate a data dictionary view and various other little graphical or non-graphical chunks. And you then take those chunks and a set of templates leveraging Jekyll, which is a static website generation tool, not FHIR specific. It's used by all sorts of folks to publish static websites. And the combination of those templates plus the fragments then builds the actual implementation guide. And because we use a template approach, there's pretty much no limit in terms of what you can make your implementation guides look like. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of ones that I've seen. Some people who just stuck with the HL7 one and tweaked it a little bit. Others who went and spent lots of money and did really cool things. Once that is done, we package everything up into various zip files so that you can download the entire implementation guide or download the profiles or download the examples or whatever you like, and you end up with your final website. If you're interested in locating the IG Publisher, go into the implementer support portion from the home page and click on downloads, which is something that you should explore if you haven't already done so. There's lots of good stuff in there. And if you scroll partway down in that list of downloads, you will see implementation tools, and within that you will find the implementation guide publisher, as well as a link to the documentation. Don't try to use the IG publisher without looking at the documentation. It's not a good idea. And in fact, you are probably best off to take one of the implementation guides that are already building and hosted in HL7's GitHub. Just go to github.com/HL7 and look at the various implementation guides there. Find one that's kind of similar to the kind of thing that you would like to do and see how they have organized the content. And then look at the IG publisher documentation to figure out how to tweak that. It's much faster than starting from scratch. The IG publisher is not static. We continue to evolve it. As mentioned, we're going to be having support for multi-version IGs shortly. The other big change that's happening is moving towards having implementation guide templates. There's sort of two pieces of work to setting up an implementation guide. One is developing your content. The other is developing the set of templates for how you want that content rendered. Everybody needs to do the first step, but most people don't need to do the second step. And that's often challenging for folks because it requires detailed knowledge of Jekyll and various other technologies that most people who want to create implementation guides don't necessarily have and don't want to acquire that badly. So we're moving the infrastructure to a place where you can just point by URL to an existing template framework and say, here's my content, and leverage somebody else's template. So HL7 will have an official template, IHE will have an official template, and you can use one of those, or you can go off and create your own, or have somebody in your organization create one, and then you just use that for all of your IGs and have them have a consistent look and feel without needing everybody to worry about, well, somebody changed that file, so I need to incorporate that into my space to make things work. You won't have to worry about that anymore. The other nice thing about the templates is that it, in addition to consistency, it makes sure that your implementation guide is going to meet certain minimum requirements so that you could publish through HL7 and that implementers will have a somewhat consistent experience looking at different implementation guides. So I'm going to quickly change screens and show you some implementation guides that have been created using the IG publisher, and also where that content or how that content is organized. Is that legible? Yay. That doesn't often happen. So let's start with a simple one. So this is an implementation guide in development through HL7 International, Structured Data Capture. This is the home page for it. There's a nice little table of contents that gets automatically generated here on the right. There's also a table of contents for the entire implementation guide, including all of the artifacts. There's an artifact index that organizes things based on artifact type, and this is driven by how you organize things in your implementation guide instance. There's a downloads page with the different types of artifacts. You can jump to the FHIR spec, etc. So this is generated using the IG publisher. This is a different implementation guide, different table of contents across the top, so you can jump to different portions of the specification. It's got embedded graphics, again that same little index all on the right hand side. We've still got an artifact index, but same set of tooling, different set of artifacts. This is also produced by the IG publisher. This is a Canadian implementation guide. They spend a lot of money on people who really knew how to do JavaScript and other things, and CSS, and made everything look nice and pretty. But with this, you can see that it's quite possible to have very different styles, very different menuing approaches, all using the same underlying publication framework. So with Jekyll and templates, you can do all sorts of weird and wild things. How weird and wild you get depends on how much money and time you want to spend and how much you want to learn the technology. How this actually works under the covers. For structured data capture, I've got a source folder. In that, I'm actually maintaining my profiles right now as spreadsheets. I do that because I need to work with FHIR Release 4, and Forge doesn't support FHIR Release 4. It's generally one version behind. And Trifolia has not yet gotten to the point where it does all the wonderful things that I want to do in my profiles. So spreadsheets is my only option unless I want to hand edit XML, which I have done on occasion, but I prefer to avoid if I can. But I also dump in my capability statements and whatever other resources I want to have. I also stick my pages in here. So this is just XHTML content. I can validate that and make sure that I haven't broken my XHTML, but I could stick Markdown in there in that same folder, and that would work just as well, either one. My includes folder lets me define what I want my menu to look like. I throw my examples into a folder. I throw my pictures into a folder. And once I've got everything where I want it to be, I edit this base implementation guide instance that says, here's my canonical URL, and more importantly, these are all the spreadsheets that I'm using. These are all the different artifacts that are part of that. And then way down at the bottom, these are the pages that I'm using. And the implementation guide publishing process looks at that and says, okay, I know how to produce that. Knowing that this is a short demonstration, I ran this ahead of time. But kick it off from the command line, it goes through, reads all of the spreadsheets, reads all of the resource instances, reads all of the examples, goes and finds the version of FHIR and any dependent implementation guides that you're pointing to, loads them into memory, generates all of the artifacts, including hitting terminology services if it needs to, and then kicks off the Jekyll process now down near the bottom to produce the static web pages, then goes through and checks everything, looks to see, do all of the hyperlinks actually point to things that exist, are all of your instances valid, produces a QA page, and says, yay, everything worked, I didn't blow up, you should be happy today, and gives you your publication. So this is a process that I run 20 odd times a day. There's actually a continuous version of this. You can kick it off, and every time you make changes to a file, it'll automatically regenerate your static website. I do some pre-processing on my files, so I can't do that. But other people, they just edit, and then they switch over to the browser and see their edits real time. So that's what the current state of the IG publisher is, and the different ways that you have available to you to publish implementation guides. And we have about 5 minutes left for questions. So questions on Trifolia or IG Publisher, or on Simplifier.
Could you go back to your console?
I can.
Sorry, could you use the microphone for your questions?
I could, except that I hit space. I can run it again.
So my question was just a lot of the validation of the terminology seemed to be to unbound value sets. There were a lot of cache misses,
Yes.
something for null. Should that not be at least a warning for the IG if you've got unbound value sets for coded fields?
Not necessarily. It depends what you're trying to do with your value set. So there's lots of data elements in the FHIR core specification that are unbound.
Yes.
because we just can't come up with the terminology. And depending at what level of implementation guide you're trying to create, having unbound terminologies is still a reasonable thing.
Yeah.
Those warnings that are being spit out there are actually part of Graham's debugging of terminology caching. Didn't used to be nearly that verbose, but we've been having trouble with caches being different on different machines, and that causes problems.
We've been having problems with that caching as well. So.
Yeah, so that's why that's spitting out there right now, but it's not considered a warning.
Presumably, the closer you get to clinical use, the more you want all of your coded fields to be bound.
Yeah.
Not necessarily all, but you want more and more of them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there may be some data elements where you say, in our space, this is basically just going to be text. Yeah. We're not going to try to land on terminology here because either nobody has codes or there's just no way we're going to get agreement within the pool of people that we have. So that's not currently set up as a quality rule, but you can certainly define profiles that would enforce that as a quality rule if you wanted to. So you can define best practice rules in your profiles that would cause warnings to spit out if you didn't meet those expectations.
Okay, thank you.
If you use the local instance of Trifolia, can you import your content back into the online hosted one?
I should be able to because you can export to a bundle, and Trifolia is perfectly happy to suck stuff up from a bundle. How many of you have actually tried to create an implementation guide? Okay. How many of you are planning to create implementation guides? It's absolutely something that FHIR is designed for. The base specification gives you a starting point and gives you a bunch of tools to use, but you absolutely need to have implementation guides to get real consistency and real interoperability. So creation of implementation guides is something that you should expect to see when you're dealing with FHIR implementation.
We are just starting with FHIR, let's say, and we are wondering which tool should we start using, Simplifier or the other one? Which do you prefer for starters?
Ooh.
Yeah.
It depends what you're wanting to do. So if you need the newest content from FHIR Release 4, then you can't really use Simplifier yet. And you'll have to wait until that support's present. But they move pretty fast, and we're close to locking R4 down. So if you're willing to wait another 3 or 4 months, then that'll be in place, and you'll be fine until you need R5 content. If you're like me, who is always needing to be on the latest and greatest, then that's not an option. I mean, Simplifier may move to an architecture at some point where they can create implementation guides for the latest and greatest, and at that point I might well start authoring using Forge and Simplifier. So there's that part. The other is how much control do you want to have over what the output looks like. So with the IG publisher, you can do some really sophisticated things and come up with IGs that are very much tuned to your space, the way that your organization likes the look and feel to be. Simplifier is more generic, but that also has the benefit that your Simplifier IG looks like everybody else's Simplifier IG, and that can lower the learning curve for consumers. Depends who your consumers are.
And of course, starting as an implementation guide on Simplifier is, I think, a bit easier than having to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once the templating process is in place for the IG publisher, it won't be nearly as scary. It'll be put these files in this folder, these files in this folder, and go. And you only have to look at the templates if you really want to, and you can sort of outsource that portion of it. But right now, if you're not sort of copying and pasting somebody else's already functioning process and building it up from scratch, it's a little intense.
I have a different question. Lloyd, would you recommend that people here worry about FHIR packages?
So repeat the question?
Should people here consider FHIR packages?
So FHIR packages is the mechanism that we use to share content between tools. So if you want your implementation guide to work as the foundation for another implementation guide, or you want the information in your implementation guide to be consumable by the FHIR validation tools, you need to be producing a package. That technology changed 5 months ago. Hopefully it's not going to change again. And the packages that you produce now will continue to work well into the future. But implementation guide resource is not yet normative. It will continue to change potentially based on implementer feedback. So there is a stream on chat.phir.org around implementation guides. If you are producing implementation guides, that might be one that you want to pay some attention to, because it will give you a clue whether things are going to change on you and how to prepare for that. There was another question.
Yes, I'm sorry, we're
Oh,
completely out of time now.
completely out of
I'm really
time.
sorry.
So
Thank you.
catch us in the hall.